I was struck by the notion that it is a deliberate humiliation that is performed in these movies, and I was wondering how that actually works. This deliberate humiliation. Thinking about it, I have the impression that there are maybe two different rhetorics aimed at two different audiences. It's at least in the fitna. I'm not so sure about submission, but because on the one hand you have in the fitna movie you have the images of cruelty and violence, which clearly are meant to shock the Dutch autonomous audience, see how cruel these people are. Yet the other part of it is showing text and ripping apart text, and that is actually much of the same rhetoric you see also in Submission. It's very much focused on the materiality of the text. It's not so much the text as a message, but as a thing, and the thing is attacked, and the thing is destroyed or degraded by writing it on a naked woman's body. And I was wondering which audience was intended with that kind of message. And my impression was that if you look for the deliberate provocation or the deliberate humiliation, it is much more in that area than in the area of the images of cruelty. But I'm not sure about it. I was wondering what you think of it.
Yeah, I like the distinction you make, and I think there's certainly a lot of truth in it. I would maintain, however, that also the images portraying violence and destruction and all that can also be deemed offensive or at least meant to provoke a reaction because it links violence clearly to Islam and the Quran. So I think still there is also a deliberate provocation and to some extent also a deliberate humiliation.
But the source of these images are much different from the source of the other images. The other images are clearly fabricated by the makers of the movie. So the others are borrowed from Arabic sites.
Arabic sites and YouTube mainly. I did not make that distinction until now. I think it's a very good point because it also shows the power of suggestion, because the Quran is not literally set up in that film. There's only the suggestion that it will happen. And there's only the suggestion that the Prophet Muhammad will explode at the end of the movie.
You've been doing a lot of field work in Gouda, right? And talking to a lot of youngsters from Roman Dutch backgrounds. I lived for 20 years, I lived in a densely populated neighborhood with a lot of people from Moroccan heritage. What I noticed is that there's something like a sort of parallel discourse communities, that don't meet each other. There's the discourses you see them portrayed when they talk about Muslims and about violence and what they do. And some intellectuals, such as me, perhaps sort of trying to counter that discourse. A lot of white faces. Occasionally you see somebody from a migrant background. Were you in that research setting while these films came out? And can you say something about the parallel discourses, and the way people locally dealt with the audiences that are partly, the target or the audience that is spoken to? What kind of coping mechanisms, what kind of counter discourses you could detect in that setting?
I was in Gouda in 2004 when Submission was released. Actually, I was supposed to have finished my field work already then, but as every good anthropologist, you take much longer. And with the film Fitna, I was doing the research among the Salafi movements at this moment. Well, with regard to submission, it was actually the most important trend was the reaction. Oh, there's another thing from this one. I don't care. Don't respond to it. But at that time, another quite a large group in Kaarle actually felt the need for action and violent action, because words and demonstrations were not enough anymore. And I think also important in that case is that at that time the Arab European League was already more or less finished. They emerged in 2001, 2002, and 2003. Emerged very fast, and then also fell very fast. That already led different people coming to the conclusion, okay, talking and demonstrations do not work here anymore. So if you shut up and you just go with the flow, or if you want to change something, you have to use violence. After this film, the group actually, well, anyway, stating that they were prepared to use violence, grew. None of them did, however, which of course is usually the case. And that actually were the two dominant reactions. There was almost no middle way. When Fitna came out, or actually when the debate about Fitna was going on, I was in several mosques and also on several of the chat rooms on the internet. The only question people had there was how to respond. They did not know how to respond. And there were a lot of problems with that because they could not ask the question in the mosque. It was very clear that all of the mosques, the so-called traditional mosques, but also the so-called radical mosques, had decided not to talk about fitna within the mosque, not to answer to questions from Muslim youth, which was a problem because then the youth who wanted to find an answer to the questions went to someone who did want to talk about, who really wanted to talk about it, and he had some other solutions. On the other hand, they also did not care that much. When the film was released, I was at a meeting in Roermond with 300 Salafi youth. At around 8 o'clock, everyone got a text message that the film was released, and I talked to them during the breaks, and we also went home by train with a group of 10, and no one talked about fitna. It wasn't. I didn't ask because I didn't want to trigger the issue if it wasn't necessary. I just wanted to see if they would come up spontaneously, but they did not talk about it.
And what would be your analysis then of that phenomenon? Because it is quite striking that is the case. If you would compare it to any kind of civil rights movements or mobilization movement or the black movement, sort of, where symbolic inversion or some kind of coping mechanism would establish to sort of turn the tables or to mobilize youngsters or to find other ways of compensating for that sort of loss.
I think the compensation is because they do not know what they have to do, how to respond. They do not respond at all, and just close themselves off from the political debates. That's actually the main trend I come across, I think, already for 4 years at this moment. People shutting themselves off from all kinds of social responsibilities or all kinds of political debates and so on. Which is, I think, very worrisome, because certainly in the case in the youth I'm working with now are actually very highly educated. From university or HBO or the higher levels of the secondary secondary schools, meaning that this is actually the sort of elite we are going to breed for the next years. And what they do now is certainly among the Salafi youth and also a little bit less strong on the other youth, is isolate themselves from society. Isolate themselves also because they cannot find an answer. I mean, no one is prepared within the mosques to talk with them about it, except those who call for real radical actions.
And has that to do with the idea that we either mistake the audience of fitna, or that we try to project upon Muslim youth something which we are not ourselves? What I mean is that we pride ourselves on being individuals in modern Western society, completely individualized, and having cut our roots with belonging communities, religious or otherwise. And here is a group of Muslim youth who are emancipating themselves, thinking only about themselves in terms of how to shape their whole lives in Holland, and then they get disturbed by us because they have to stand up and represent a group to which they, of course, belong, but they do not want to represent. And that we confuse that with, oh, they're isolating themselves. No, they just want to live their lives. And they are going to stand up and represent and defend the group, because it's possible.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true for a large part. And most of them just want to live their lives and do not want to get bothered with all kinds of questions about Islam. And for my PhD research, there was this girl, as an example of how people get bothered with Islam continually almost. There was this girl, she was 12 years old, and she wanted to wear a headscarf because her older sister, she was 20, also wore a headscarf. And she wanted exactly the same headscarf as her sister. But her parents forbid her to wear the headscarf because at her school it was not allowed, so if she would wear it, she would get into trouble, and the parents didn't want to get her into trouble. But well, she was 12 years old, so what she did, she wore the headscarf to school. She was asked by a teacher why she had chosen to wear, or why her parents had forced her to wear the headscarf, or was it something from Islam? Well, there was a crisis at school because, well, she wore a headscarf, and then of course she got into trouble because her parents forbid it. After a very long talk with her parents and with me as well, I was present there as well, the girl decided, okay, well, let's not wear a headscarf for the coming years then. And then the next day, or a few days later, she went back to school because she was expelled for 3 days. And after 3 days, she went back. And then the teacher asked, why don't you wear a headscarf? Because it's obliged in Islam. So whatever you do, it's never completely right. And
it's always wrong.
It's always wrong, and I mean, in this case, the girl was 12 years old. I mean, she doesn't know anything about the written traditions in Islam and what is allowed or what is not allowed in Islam. And that actually pertains to a lot of youth. But in some cases, I think it's also a little bit more than just trying to live their life. What I've seen is that among the students, I'm not exactly sure for the universities, but certainly on HBO level, and also in youth work, where it was actually quite easy to get Moroccan Dutch volunteers until a few years ago. And now most people say, I'm not going to do it anymore. Because whatever I do, I still end up getting questions about Islam or why Muhammad really kills the overwalk, and I still don't know why he did it. So there is a form of retreat in it as well, I think. And also because those who were active in the past refuse to be active at this moment. And also, of course, in the case of Fitna, there was, I forgot his name, but I think it was from GroenLinks, the Green Left Party, or D66, the Progressive Liberal Party, stating that, the best thing Muslims could do was to remain quiet, because if only one Muslim would commit a violent act, it would prove Wilder's film. Which is, if we look closely at that remark, it's quite ridiculous. I mean, there are about 1 billion Muslims in the world, so if one person does something and the rest doesn't, I don't think it really says something about Islam. But
Probably the media and Wilder.
of course, they would use it, and many of these youth, of course, knew that, so that's also a reason why they decided not to respond. Which, in fact, I think shows some sort of subordination.
Do you consider it subordination? Do you consider it kind of a sense of discipline with a long-term projection? As in, like, if we try to ignore it, if we try not to react, not because we want to subordinate, so etc., but rather than to make him look like a fool or a caricature, perhaps that is our victory in the long term.
I would not really know how to respond to that. I think, well, of course, there were people who said, if you do not respond, it makes him look like a fool if no one responds. And to some extent, of course, there is some truth in that. But that remark only came up after they had concluded that they could not really do anything. So I think it's also a sort of legitimization for not doing anything. But I mean, there is also some truth in it, of course. I mean, the calm reactions also actually show that he was wrong with his movie.
And then, Lucas, if I may, to bring it to another issue that what I said before, like, do we mistake the audience? Like, for whom did Wilders make this movie? To insult Muslims and to try to invoke some kind of reaction, or is the audience his electorate, to basically middle class white people who are afraid, to try to make them more afraid in order to get more of the same, more votes, and that he doesn't care what the reaction of the Muslim community is, because they won't vote for him anyway. But rather, like, let's try to stir up some kind of momentum among my group, so they follow me. And on that point, I think he's proven right, because he's doing very well.
Yeah.
Our mistake, when we look at the problem of fitna, do we mistake our perspective? Should we look at ourselves as representatives of the white middle class community, rather than looking at the Muslim community?
Yeah.
Who, have their hands tied.
I would not really say it's a mistake, but it would be, I think, one-sided to focus only on Muslim people in the Netherlands or worldwide, because of course his message is certainly aimed at his constituency. And that's also why I said in the beginning that both Wilders and Hessiana with these films, trying to build their status as authoritative spokespersons. And well, both of them, to a large extent, succeeded, I think, with these films. I think what is important to do is, in the beginning I talked about the essentialist rhetoric among politicians as Wilders and Hessiana, which is quite widespread in Dutch or even European politics, I think, at this moment. But should be needed, I think, because I think that is the way these politicians tap into these feelings among their constituency. But how that in fact works and how widespread these feelings are among, well, say the normal people on the streets, that is actually something I don't know. I have some idea based on the Ethnobrometer research, course, it's only in Gouda, and we all know since last week that Gouda is very special.
It's burning.
It's burning. So how these sort of this essentialist rhetoric on the political level, on the macro level, actually trickles down on the local level, I think that is something that is worthwhile to look into before you can give a really good answer to that question.
Anyone else? Another question or comment? No?
If you look at YouTube, for instance, you do clearly see that how local youth pick up the dominant discourse, and you want to try and sort of use that as self-labelings and rework that in different ways. So that's where you definitely see that interaction taking place.
Yeah.
Of course, YouTube is not really representative of that.
No, but
It's interesting to see that that's an interesting sort of theater of interaction.
Yeah. And I certainly think for youth it's an important theater.
It is, yeah.
And also I think about the audience of the film, we should not forget that both films have an international audience. It's
Yeah.
not only meant for Dutch politics. Fitna has a English and Dutch version. I think Submission had only a Dutch version.
No, English.
English? It was English, huh? Okay, it was an English version. Which of course problematizes Ayaan Ali's reason for making the movie, addressing Muslim women to stand up against their violent husbands. I mean, if you want to do that in the Netherlands, please make your film in Dutch.
Or Turkish or Moroccan.
Or Turkish or Moroccan, but certainly not in English, I think. But that's also, I think, very...
Don't show it as favorite.
And don't show it as favorite or Zoma, because it really takes too long. Yeah. Well, the Dutch Muslim Umroep had offered Wilders to air his film.
Yeah.
Because of course that was one of the most interesting moves I think I've seen.
Okay, then I think, thank you again.